In today's video, we are going to talk about when it's time to make adjustments when you're in a cutting phase. Alright guys, so I talked about how if you have any questions you want me to do video topics on, please go ahead and leave them at any point. This topic is going to be from a question I got actually on Facebook, but wherever you want to put it is totally fine. And this comes from Kim, and it's basically a two-part question. I will go over both parts, but for the most part, it's going to cover the first part, and that is, when is it time to make adjustments during a cutting phase and how to go about that? Also, stretches and mobility work that you find useful. Okay, so Kim, thank you for the question. Now, before I get into when it's time to make adjustments, I first want to talk about how you're tracking progress to know that you do need adjustments, all right? So the very first thing that comes into play is you got to make sure you're being consistent, all right? Are you consistently hitting your calories or your macros? Are you consistently getting all your workouts in? Are you consistently doing the same amount of weight training and cardio and all that type of stuff? Because if you're all over the board, there's really no sense in making any adjustments, really, because what are you basing it off of? If you don't know what you're doing, how can you possibly make adjustments? All right, so that's one of the things about, like, should you track or should you not? Like, you don't have to track, but it's going to be really hard to make adjustments if you're not tracking because you don't know where you're at. So that's key number one, is you have to make sure you've been consistent before making any adjustments. All right, now if you've been consistent and you're not seeing progress, first let's talk about, like, how long have you been tracking and how are you tracking? Because if you didn't see any drops in scale weight for a week, that doesn't automatically mean it's time to make adjustments, okay? Make sure you're tracking weight, make sure you're tracking measurements, make sure you're tracking body composition is a huge one that most people don't pay attention to. So, I mean, take progress pictures, do it in the same lighting, in the same conditions, same angles, everything, so you can see if there's a difference and track that closely. Track, how your clothes are feeling, how you're feeling personally. These all contribute into making progress, okay? So, just because a scale isn't moving doesn't mean that you're not making progress, and you got to give it time. This stuff takes time, so don't just make changes all the time just to make changes, all right? Give it a couple weeks, give it a few weeks just to make sure, and then if things really aren't moving, then you can start making adjustments. Now, what kind of adjustments should you make? Well, as always, it just kind of depends. Obviously, every single person is very unique, and it needs to be handled as such, but the more you've done this and the more history you have, the better you're going to understand kind of how to make adjustments. So some people respond really well with really small changes. You stall out, you drop 10 carbs, boom, it starts moving again. Some people, that doesn't do anything and they got to make bigger adjustments. Maybe they need to drop 100 calories or more. I mean, you just never know. Maybe you need to add more cardio. I will say this, the smaller adjustments that you can make while starting to see progress again, the better, because if you cut a bunch of calories right away and then you stall again, eventually you're going to run out of calories to take away from. You can only do so much before you'll eventually have to reverse diet to get things working again. So patience is a big one, making smaller adjustments, as small adjustments as possible while still seeing results, and just continually tracking and going from there. It's just one of those things, like, I wish I had a magic answer for people, is, do this, do that, but it really takes being consistent, tracking, monitoring how things are going, and going from there. So it really depends on you and your body and how things go for you. So maybe try just taking away 50 calories at a time, and see if that works. If it doesn't work after a couple weeks, make a bigger adjustment. But you just have to understand that it's going to be different. It's going to be a long process. This stuff doesn't happen right away, and you just have to be really patient. The other thing to keep in mind is, and I say this because I know Kim personally, and I know kind of her history a little bit, and she is someone who has done an amazing job. She's lost a lot of weight, and she's kept it off for a long time, and now it's kind of gotten to that point where, okay, now we're getting to the tough stuff. We're getting to the point where things are a little bit stubborn, and getting that last little bit of weight off is going to be tough. So I know that she's been consistent, and I know that she's a hard worker and all that. So at some point, it comes down to, it's going to suck. Like, if you really want to get that last weight off, you might just have to embrace that suck a little bit. And you're probably going to have to get your calories down to an uncomfortably low level for a while. You're probably going to have to do more cardio than you want to do. And you're going to have to just really go hard at it to get that last bit of weight off, understanding that once it's off, you can reverse diet out to be a little bit more sustainable. How hard are you willing to go to get that last bit off? If you're if you get to a certain point where it's just, you're miserable and you can't stand it and you don't want to do anymore, well, maybe it's time to just think about, where your maintenance is, It's up to each and every individual. There's no rule that says you have to get to a certain point. It's just, what are you willing to do to get there, all right? And that's different for everybody. Okay, second part, mobility work that I recommend. I honestly can't really even answer this question because mobility is so unique to each individual and really typically comes down to kind of movement patterns and their history and dysfunctions of each person's body, because really, mobility exercises aren't really necessary if you don't have an issue with mobility. So if you have an issue with mobility in a certain area, then that's what you would do, but there's no blanket, everyone should do this, everyone should do that, in my opinion. The best thing you can do, and this is kind of out of my scope a little bit, is see a physical therapist who can really check out your movement patterns, look at everything, and just break down where the dysfunctions are and give you the proper exercises to try to help fix those problems. That's kind of what I'm doing between my hip and my shoulder and elbow right now. I have a lot of different kind of dysfunctions from playing baseball for 25 years. It pretty much brought this whole shoulder girdle forward, and I've had to work on getting that back, and it's just I'm doing a lot of work. But what I'm doing specifically, if I just gave that to somebody else, it might be completely worthless to them because they're not in my body. So I'm not a big fan of just general mobility work, because you could actually make things worse. Just because something's hurting or something feels like it's tight doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you should stretch out. You know what I mean? Because if, let's just say, for instance, the reason that that part of your body is hurting is because that part of that side of your body is weaker than the other side. And if you're squatting and everything's kind of shifting to that side, well, that side is going to get more sore, but stretching it would only make it worse because it would make it more loose and make that dysfunction even worse. So it's not necessarily, okay, this hurts, stretch it. It's really complicated stuff, and I just don't like to give general kind of advice in terms of mobility. So I apologize for that, but it is what it is. Hopefully that was helpful. Any questions on this, just let me know. If anybody has any other questions, shoot them in the comments below and I'll be sure to cover it. And I will talk to you guys in the next video.
I'm addicted to the love that you're giving. Every minute, every day I've been craving.